What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So what if I told you that buying the lesser option of something was actually the better choice? Like a cheaper car with a smaller engine being faster than a hypercar, or a medium order of french fries actually having more in the box than an extra large. You'd probably think I was crazy, or that something wasn't quite right. Well, that's sort of the story with this year's Samsung Galaxy A34. If you've seen some of my other Samsung A series videos already, you know what I'm about to say. Basically, this A34 ended up being better than its higher tier counterpart, Samsung's A54, and I don't really think it was supposed to be that way. Usually, Samsung differentiates its lesser A-series phones by withholding certain features, a high refresh rate display, certain camera specs, charging speeds, whatever. But with the A34, not only did Samsung give this phone everything the A54 has, but they also made the mistake of trying to opt for a less powerful processor as a way to bring this phone down a notch, but ended up taking an embarrassing misstep that further cements their long-standing problems with their own in-house hardware. Basically, they thought their own Exynos chipset in the A54 would be better than the MediaTek chipset in the A34, but whoops, that wasn't actually the case. I'm getting a little ahead of myself though, and for those of you in the US, you may not have even realized the A34 exists. It's technically not a phone that's available here in the States, at least not through major carriers like the A54 is, but it's an unlocked GSM 5G phone all the same, compatible with AT&T, T-Mobile, and their various subsidiaries, and you can easily buy it from any third-party retailer like Amazon or even QVC and HSN sell it, which is a little odd. Wherever you buy it from, you shouldn't pay more than about $300 for it. I've seen Amazon have it listed for under $250, and that makes it at least $100 cheaper than the A54. A great deal for a Samsung smartphone in general, but especially good when you realize what you actually end up getting. Now, okay, so technically the A34 doesn't have everything the A54 has. Samsung still went with that dated budget phone design with this A34, where you get a teardrop-shaped notch for the selfie camera and bigger borders surrounding the display. But this phone actually has a larger 6.6-inch screen compared to the A54's 6.4-inch screen, and its overall physical size isn't that much bigger, so the screen-to-body ratio, for some reason, is better on this A34. You get more screen within its overall form factor. So yeah, this phone may not have the exact same screen size and dimensions as the A54, but that's because those aspects are actually better. Around back though, the A34 is still made of plastic. It was redesigned a little to imitate Samsung's flagship phones, so the A series and S series at a glance look identical, but the cheaper materials here are pretty obvious. And on the A54, Samsung did opt for a glass rear cover. The frames of all the A series phones though are plastic, and you can see through a few months of use now that I have quite a few nicks and dents, which is a little annoying. If only this phone came with the case in the box like the A series used to have. Speaking of something phones used to have, a headphone jack would have been nice, and in fact, I think I see a big old spot where a headphone jack could have been, so maybe I'll drill one out myself. This phone does still have a micro SD card slot though, so that's nice at least. You get a minimum of 128 gigabytes of built-in storage, which is a decent amount, but it's always nice to at least have the option of adding more. By the way, I should mention that your configuration options this year for both the A34 and A54 are exactly the same. 128 or 256 gigabytes of storage and 6 or 8 gigs of RAM. So if you're keeping tally, that's an even score there. And this phone also has an in-display fingerprint sensor, which I believe is the same as what's on the A54. The A series still doesn't get that fancy ultrasonic sensor the flagship phones have, but no big deal, it still works fine. and I haven't had any issues with it. Also, yes, it is well over 100 degrees where I live. Everyone always asks me how it could be so hot. To stay cool this summer, I'm still using my Ice 3 portable neck fan from channel sponsor Ranvu. The Ice 3 is an AI-powered automated cooling and heating wearable with additional health and wellness capabilities. It has 4 Ice Max engines with 7 upward and downward air ducts that blow a constant stream of cool air right on you. There's also 4 cooling semiconductors on the sides, that part that touches your skin, and that gets cold to the touch. And if you're in a cold environment, the Ice 3 actually does the opposite. You get a stream of warm air paired with a heated neckband. The Ice 3 has a full color touchscreen built in for controlling everything. It also tracks other health metrics like your heart rate, steps, and blood oxygen level. It's super smart, and it pairs with the MetAura app on iOS and Android, where you have full control over the cooling and heating modes and quick access to your health and wellness info. And one more thing, the Ice 3 is AI powered. So if it senses that you're warm, or that it's a bit cold out, it can automatically start cooling you down or warming you up. It takes into account the ambient temperature and various body measurements to give you exactly what you need. Ranvu's Ice 3 is once again available for 20% off, and there's an additional coupon you can apply as well. The hot days are sticking around a little longer for me, so I'm glad to have the Ice 3 keeping me cool, and thanks so much to Ranvu for sponsoring the channel this summer. So one other aspect of this phone that's the same as the A54 this year is the actual display itself, the viewing experience, the specs. And this is really interesting for 2 reasons. One, it is an upgraded display from last year's A33. It's brighter, it's a 120 Hz refresh rate instead of 90. That's all great, but more importantly, the core specs of this display on this phone and on the A54 by extension are almost the same now as what you'd get on Samsung's $800 S23 flagship. Seriously. And I believe that's a result of Samsung essentially not really upgrading the S23 for the last couple of years, and Samsung also being sort of stuck with the inability to significantly upgrade these A-series phones without actually exceeding their own flagship lineup. It's a weird problem to have. All these phones are so close in specs and features now, but that just means this sub $300 phone gives you a nearly identical viewing experience at almost 1/3 the price. It's a bold, bright, and super responsive 120 Hz screen that is probably the standout feature for the A34 in particular when you consider its price. And there isn't a single thing that was sacrificed. It's even a 1080 resolution display. And I say that only because sometimes that's where Samsung compromises. But no, it has the trifecta of screen features, as I like to say. 1080 resolution, 120 Hz, and AMOLED. It's got it all and then some. And not only is it reason enough to just get this phone in general, but it's one more reason to not even bother with the A54. You get the same exact display for less money. All right, now let's get into the point of this whole video, performance. So essentially what Samsung did here is they took what was supposed to be their new higher spec mid-tier Exynos chipset and stuck it into the A54. And this A34 got the MediaTek Dimensity 1080, a nearly 1-year-old, seemingly less powerful processor. What they didn't bank on is that this older MediaTek processor is better than their own newer Exynos chip. How do I know that? Well, I've done a ton of speed and performance tests with both phones now, and not only does the A34 almost always keep up with the A54, a lot of times the A34 is literally just the faster device when it launches and loads various apps. And whether it's a minor speed difference or an inconsistent result, I don't think that matters. What does matter is the simple fact that Samsung can't technically say that the A54 is faster or that it performs better than the A34. It objectively is not true, at least not always true. This is great news for the A34 because once again, it means for less money, you get as good or better of a device. Performance isn't a reason to jump up to the A54 and spend an additional $100 or $150. Also, like I mentioned earlier, you can't even spec the A54 any higher than the A34. So there's nothing you can do to get any more performance or value from the A54. There's no justification in opting for it. You also get the same software updates for the same number of years. So longevity-wise, the A34 will feel fresh and new for the same amount of time. Samsung won't leave you hanging if you get this phone instead of the more expensive one. And this again showcases the most pivotal issues facing Samsung's smartphone lineup. The phones right now are just way too similar, and their highest end phones aren't being upgraded enough. In my opinion, there's never been a better time not to get a high-end Samsung smartphone. And with this A34 being so close to the A54 for the first time ever, I wouldn't even consider the highest end A series phone either. And it doesn't end with performance. My A34 also lasts longer and has more juice left at the end of each day compared to the A54, usually by 10 or 15%. This, in my opinion, may be due to Samsung's Exynos processor simply not being as well optimized, or perhaps just requiring more power to function. Exynos chipsets are known to overheat, they're known to be poor performers. It's a shame to say that. I think the stigma continues to just be somewhat justified, and it is the biggest reason why the A34 this year is the better buy. And one final point I want to make, as far as the camera setup and pictures and video samples, besides the selfie camera, which weirdly enough is a lot better on the A54 and actually wasn't upgraded at all from last year's A33, the rear lens setup on this phone isn't that far off, and the features and functions are the same as any other mid-tier or upper-tier Samsung device you've experienced before. The main lens here is a 48 megapixel f1.8 aperture shooter. The ultra-wide lens is a very useful 8 megapixel camera. There's a 5 megapixel macro for up-close pictures, and in my time using this phone, the way I would describe the actual results would be decisively budget, just like I said with the A54. If there's one thing Samsung hasn't adequately upgraded on all of these A-series phones up to this point, it is the camera setup and the shooting capabilities. These pictures with their shallow dynamic range, consistent overexposure, lack of much detail, they're consistent with what you'd expect on a sub $300 phone. That's not to say that these are bad pictures necessarily, but the standard for smartphone photography is so high now that it's very obvious these phones don't do a comparable job. And if there were any reason at all to opt for specifically a Samsung flagship, not the A54, mind you, it also takes subpar pictures, this would be it. Flagship phones continue to be worth the money in the camera department, but I think most people still just quickly snap a regular old picture of their friends or their dog without much thought, and this phone will be more than fine for that purpose. To Samsung's credit, I honestly think this A34 is the best phone in their entire lineup right now, just based on everything you get for the money. The nice design, the great display, the specs. It is far and away the best overall value, the best bang for your buck at well under $300. But I honestly don't think that was their intention. I think Samsung just has too many devices now that are too similar, and I think it was an unfortunate mistake opting for an Exynos processor in what was supposed to be the better A54. Overall, it's not really the better device, certainly not for $100 or $150 more, and aside from the fact that maybe the A34 is a little more difficult to acquire depending on where in the world you live, I think it will really outsell the A54 when people do some comparing. I guess that was sort of the whole point of this video, so hopefully it helped you out, but what do you guys think? Am I maybe missing something? Is the A34 really that good? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course, especially if you have this phone yourself. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.